Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much to our panelists. I'll let you introduce yourselves in just a moment. As Anna mentioned, my name is Emma Mayberry. I run the 100% Talent Initiative out of the Seattle Metro Chamber of Commerce and also run by Women's Funding Alliance. We're galvanizing regional employers here in King County around best practices to close the wage gap. We hold really tactical, best practices focused workshops at least once a quarter with our member companies. And if you're interested in learning more about that and how your companies can get involved, please visit 100%talentseattle.com. Got a couple folks from our member companies here today, folks from Artemis Connection, folks from CenturyLink, and probably others that you may not know are a part of our initiative. So check us out, and we'd love to have you involved. I'm going to turn it over really quick to our panelists to introduce yourselves, and then we'll jump right into male allyship.
Terrific. I'm Dawn Verburg. I am the Director of Program Management at CenturyLink. I've been there for about 18 years. In my role, I have both a team and then also individual contributor responsibilities, and I've worked on a variety of programs. Right now, I'm working on a big data analytics program for the company.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hodson Meurn, and I work for Accenture. I'm a principal director in our innovation and thought leadership group, which is kind of new. We didn't have that before. We just worked. We didn't innovate, I guess. But the point is, I work and focus on high-tech companies with their retail presence. So my client is primarily Microsoft, a little bit with eBay. Helping them to think about how to really change in the world of Amazon. What are we going to do? So happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Scott Case. I have two jobs that are worth talking about here. One is I helped start a company called EnergySavvy, which is a small, well, actually not so small anymore, 75-person software company in Pioneer Square, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer there. And then about 4 years ago, I co-founded Ada Developers Academy, which is a intensive training program for women switching into software engineering roles, sort of mid-career. So, and now I chair the board for Ada, so and do lots and lots of volunteer work on that. So anyway, that's me.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks again for being here. Let's dive right in. So for those, especially in STEM fields, we know that most of them are male-dominated. Despite the fact that women are catching up in terms of educational attainment. We've got like almost 40% of STEM degrees now being offered to women, and yet that doesn't always translate to what we see in the workforce still. So could you speak to what it's like working in male-dominated industries, and how does that translate to culture and opportunities for women?
So a diverse workforce is extremely important at CenturyLink, and one that we strive to maintain. We foster a culture really that is inclusive and one that's based on collaboration and mutual respect. And our goal is really to have every employee feel included, respected, appreciated, and a part of our family, our CenturyLink family. I can tell you from my own personal experience that I've been afforded many opportunities despite the fact that there are organizations at CenturyLink that are predominantly male. I've moved from an individual contributor to a manager to a director in a short number of years. And I've also been exposed to high visibility strategic programs, large investments that are being made by the company I've been asked to lead and be responsible for. So I have felt that the opportunities have been there despite the fact that some of the organizations I deal with are predominantly male-oriented or dominated.
Okay, so when I started back at Anderson Consulting, which was part of Arthur Anderson, I was wearing my suit and writing code. You know, this is the old days, and there were very few women. And I also went to an engineering school, and very few women. But I didn't think of it as a thing. I just, this is fine. And I think what it really was interesting to me is at the time our company really didn't talk much about diversity. There was an idea of what success looked like, and it didn't really look like me, but I didn't worry about that. I was going to get there anyways, and I did and make progress. But now we talk about it a lot because our clients, we work with high-tech companies that you've all seen the press where they really don't have the diversity. And if we show up at a proposal with 10 people in the room and all white men, that's not going to work. We need to really show that we're taking diversity seriously, not because we want to look a certain way. We want to really, what we've learned is it's a business decision. You're going to have a better solution if you're taking other perspectives into it, and we think very hard about how we're showing up to things. We do a lot of events, we do a lot of coaching, and I think it's really become more and more important over the last few years. Before it really, we felt like often we were pushing our way up the battle. We're still pushing, they're still not there, but I think the recognition that it is important from a business perspective has been really helpful, because then suddenly the male allies are jumping in and advocating for us more and more, which I think is a great change.
So not to jump in and mansplain on this question, right? I recognize that this, the way I might answer this question is a little bit different because I'm not like in the same place. So I will say, kind of relate some of the experiences that I've heard from the graduates of ADA and now this is our program is, 24 or now 48 women in a classroom, all learning in a really safe environment, like how to do really, really difficult things, right? Write code and be a software engineer. And so they do that for 6 months and then get into, they do internships. We basically have internships with tech companies now, 40 or 50 companies around tech companies around the country, around the city. And so everybody has this experience of going from this really supportive, inclusive environment in the classroom to being oftentimes the only woman on a team full of white male tech bros. Some of them not tech bros, maybe I won't use that term. And probably to no surprise of anybody in this room, and there's they face all manner of overt and implicit sexism, including an incomplete list of stories that we have heard, because we do sort of support them in their internships as they continue along, because it's sort of it's like a little bit of a this safe space continues a little bit as they go. So one of them getting in, and I will not name companies, but getting into her team has she goes to lunch the first week and they declare it's HR free zone at the lunch table. They all eat together. Another one at a large tech company here, getting mistaken for coming into a engineering meeting, and she's the first one there, and the next people arrive are like, oh, you're in the wrong room, and actually no, I'm not in the wrong room. And then we even had even earlier we had people, a tech company come in, and we do essentially interviews between the interns and our companies, and had a tech company come in with 2 guys for the interview day, and just make asshole comments the whole day in this interview round. And at the end of that day, all the students rate which company they want to go to, and every single student rated that company a 0, basically, I'm not going there. And we try and match people. And so we kind of took the ratings for that day. We went back to the company. We said, guess what? They had already paid us and everything. We said, guess what? You screwed up. We're not going to be placing any interns with you. You can have your money back if you want. And all of in this hyper competitive talent, talent environment, all these amazing engineers. And by the way, they wanted a whole bunch of the people they talked to that day. All these amazing engineers are going to other companies. Your competitors for talent. And so we had this really we honestly didn't know what was going to happen. I like to think, so we never actually ended up working with them, although they also didn't get their money back. They just were so dysfunctional, they didn't even think to ask her for their money back, so we were like, great, it's a donation. But I do think, picking up on what Anne said, I think that maybe what's changing now, and I certainly have seen this at EnergySavvy, what's changing is that because of all the press that's sort of at least is being written about and talked about now, that male leaders and male allies at all levels are beginning to step up and say, it's okay to talk about this now. And in our experience, it's not, it doesn't have to be 100% of the guys. Like all you need to, this isn't like turn 100% of men into allies. It's just like start with a few, and that goes a long way. And then we'll talk about, I think, ally training later in the thing.
I think it's great. We're kind of setting the tone. Here's the sort of status quo, right? That things are changing. Opportunities do exist, but sometimes they come sort of a little at a time, or it becomes the business case for inclusion, and then creating safe spaces and what happens when you don't. So what is male allyship? Because that really gets us to the nugget of what we want to talk about. So what is it?
I think there's no one definition, I suppose, and I think that it's an evolving maybe thing that's becoming bigger within organizations as the dialogue becomes stronger nationally and maybe even internationally. And I think we're going to see more of it within our organizations. But I think it's support for women and for diverse organizations, groups within organizations. Support listening, learning, advocacy for, I liken it to sponsorship. I suppose I like the word sponsorship a bit more, but it's really advocacy, I think, for individuals within an organization to help promote them, to help guide them through an organization in general.
I agree with Dawn. I think that support and advocacy is really, really important. I was telling these guys a story about, just going through a promotion process, finding the sponsors to help you get through. I needed to line up my male allies and female allies, because what I realized is there was one female ally and 15 men allies who got to make the decision. The first year I was up for my promotion, I had the woman ally who was the boss, but I hadn't spent the time to line up the sponsorship of the 5 other people and make sure that they were also saying, yes, 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 I'm with you. And so I literally had to sit down with each of those men, and I didn't have to, but I did it, and I asked them to tell me, okay, what do I need to do to get here, to get your sponsorship? We talked about it, we wrote it down. I said, okay, this is what you told me. If I do this, will you sponsor me? And when you really ask someone to take ownership for you and take ownership for helping you, they will. But I didn't realize I had to really literally say, I'm coming to you, you're accountable, will you do this? Then they did. Then they would help me. And I noticed behaviors like I'd ask them, I did this in a meeting, my boss, Gil, will you just, mention this to this other boss for me? Sure. People are willing to do things for you, but I had to ask more than I thought I had to. And I did see some of my male colleagues get the sponsorship without asking, which was very frustrating to me. But, I realized, do I want to do this? Do I want to make a difference and change and get this done or not? And I had made a decision, and that sponsorship and the allies that I built are still my allies, and now I have my little team. And having that is so important as I progress.
I think, just if I can pick up on that, I think it's important that we as women are bold enough to ask for those sponsorships. I think that's maybe one of the biggest roadblocks. We don't ask. And then once we ask and we get that support, we need to be worthy of that support. It's a full-time responsibility to have a sponsor and to meet the needs of a sponsor, whether it's male or female.
I think about, when I think about allyship, the way I'm going to start it with my own story, and then I'm going to do a shameless plug for ally training that Ada offers for companies. So I think about recognizing privilege as a man in tech. So I'm white, obviously, a guy, 40 years old, went to MIT for grad school. Like, I'm about as dominant a culture as there is in tech, right? And so for me, I kind of think about like recognizing that, all those things as privilege, and then taking that privilege and then wielding it like a baseball bat to basically clear space for people that don't have all those advantages. Ada started last year. We started offering this ally training program, which it was really cool. EnergySavvy went through it, like not everybody, but a bunch of the leaders at EnergySavvy went through it, and we were sort of like the guinea pig to see how it was going to be. And so we got a little bit of the rough version, and then they ironed it out, and they're doing a much better job now. Covered things like implicit bias and institutional racism and microaggressions, and like my favorite, like, I'm a very solution-oriented person, so my favorite was like what you can do about each of those. Like once there's microaggressions and there's micro-resistance that you can, like, as an ally, you can do things differently and to kind of help counteract that. You don't need to get everybody. In fact, you don't want to have the like 20% toxic people that just don't want to be in there. But then making sure that the senior leaders at the company are there, because if they're there, then like it's obvious to everybody else that like, oh, this is they're setting the example. I should be here and I should be following the lead. And then over time, I think you are able to encourage other allies as well.
For women in general in the workplace, across all the companies that we work with, we often encounter this double bind, this idea around women and emotions and showing vulnerability. And at the same time, there's also a lot of discussion in business literature around emotional intelligence and what that means for leadership. And in the context of today's discussion, I'm wondering if you guys have thoughts on men and showing emotion and vulnerability, and what that means both for their leadership potential, men and women in their organizations, and what it means for women in fields like STEM.
We, as consultants, a lot of you out there probably are also, we're really thinking about something, we call it rotating to the new, the new meaning the new tech, the cloud, the machine learning, the analytics, like you're working on, and new ways of modern engineering, there's a lot of new out there. And so the way you used to be successful as a consultant is, she's laughing because I think that too. It's kind of funny. You're like, but so we used to be really good at consulting because we were experts at something, and you would do it over and over again. And so the old version of success was one thing, but that's probably not going to be the picture of what's successful going forward. So we've defined, successful people are going to have that ability to learn, the ability to lead, and then emotional intelligence. It's in our 3 pillars, and it's never been there before. And I think us females sometimes have this as a strength. It's not to stereotype. I mean, everybody's different, but I was told when I was younger I had a Jedi mind trick, and what I was doing was listening, and they're like, how did you know that they wanted that? And I'm like, well, I watched their emotions, and I realized they were angry, and so I didn't say the thing, and my bosses were like, wow, and yeah.
Well, and that makes me think too, you think about STEM in particular and innovation and the need to be willing to fail, and how you need emotional intelligence to deal with that as well.
I want to build on that. It was actually a story I heard yesterday about Satya Nadella at Microsoft. And obviously, for those of you who kind of have heard him versus Steve Ballmer, like very, very different personalities, right? And the story I thought was really cool that I heard was in the early days of Satya running like senior leadership team meetings or whatever, that he is able to do that. He's got the same Jedi mind trick, and that he would specifically call out people like when he saw them sit back and cross their arms or whatever it was, and has a far higher emotional or EQ than Steve Ballmer did. And it only took a very little bit of time for him doing that all of a sudden all the people on that senior leadership team started doing it in their organizations, because he sort of like set that example. So I thought that was a really cool story.
So what do you think is the biggest missing piece that could accelerate this discussion around male mentors, male allies? And also, how do we translate that to action?
I think it's just awareness, to be honest. And as the dialogue, as I said, grows stronger nationally and within organizations, I think it's our responsibility to discuss it and educate many of our male counterparts and female counterparts for that matter as well. I don't think it's an unwillingness to participate. I think it's just maybe a lack of awareness and maybe some hesitation on how to navigate it. So as the conversation becomes more out in the open and we help guide that conversation, I think those barriers will come down, will decrease.
One observation we've had in several of our companies actually that work with Ada is that the first, like there's a team of 6 people or whatever, 10 people, and they get one female software engineer on the team, and it's fine. There's, it's hard for that person, everything like that, but several of our engineering managers have said they've noticed that when they get to 30%, that there is like this tipping point where the entire team gets more productive. And there's been some, I think there's definitely academic research on how more diverse teams like perform better. But what I heard I've heard repeatedly is like the supposition was like with the case of the Ada grads is that they come in and they're working their asses off and just like, just absolutely crushing everything they can see. And all the men that are on those teams are like, oh, I can't slack off anymore. And so they start to sort of pick up their game as well. And then, I think there's other reasons why, diverse teams are more productive and like write software that actually gets used in the right way and everything like that. But I think that was, I could imagine that productivity stat isn't the only sort of thing that flips over when it's not just one person. So you're not done when you have the one token diversity person on your team.
Right.
So.
Great. Well, I could keep going with questions, but I want to open it up to the audience if you guys have any. And fix my mic here. Yes, Julie. The question was, what do you do if, as an ally, you know that you might, the person that you're being an ally on behalf of might surpass you in rank or might leave your team?
So I would just say that I've always had a very supportive management team, leadership team, and they've always been open. We've had open conversations about my potential to move up or out of an organization, and I've never felt that it's been a barrier at all or something that they've tried to prevent. And so I think it's sort of ingrained in what we do at CenturyLink. It's a very encouraging environment, and I would feel actually that I had met my goal as a manager to have someone move up and out and be successful within the organization. It's just really been that supportive, and it's something that I would carry on. I certainly benefited from it, enjoyed it, and I would do the same thing for my employees going forward.
That happens to us all the time. Well, we'll train somebody and they'll go and the clients will take them. And I spent a lot of time working with people, and sometimes it's really disappointing to say, oh, I put so much time into that. But also some of them become my best clients, because I mentored them when they worked with me or for me. And then, they know that I'm genuine, and they know that my advice is still the same. So sometimes it's hard. And then I also believe that people are on different career journeys. Some people are on a very fast path and are willing to make the sacrifices to go really quickly. And some people, are willing to, like me, my children are 6 and 8, and I wanted this promotion, but I'm not going to push for the next one for a little while. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to build a portfolio, and I'm choosing that. So I'm probably mentoring some people who will pass me, and I hope they do. And then they can help me when I'm ready to go to the next. So I think that's a really good question.
One of the things that I've read that it's more effective to have a big network with a lot of weak connections than a small network with a lot of really strong connections. And so I think that helping people, like I've definitely written really strong letters of recommendation for business school for people in my company, and I know they're going to leave. They're going to get in because I'm going to write them an awesome letter, and they're going to leave as a result. But like Ann said, they show up as your customer, or they show up in some other way, and you're better off like having a great relationship with somebody who's like out there, than having a great relationship that you keep that person really close. So,
my question is, our organization is really interested in becoming a lot more diverse. So we are an India-sponsored company based here in Redmond, and have a lot of that diversity in our group, about 90%. And we obviously I'm not, but in that space, when you aren't highly diverse yet and you want to move toward diversity, making people feel comfortable when they're coming into that space, not because the staff don't want them there, but just because they're really the odd person out, right? How do you create that kind of environment where there is inclusion beyond just smiles and quick conversations and we're glad you're here? There's got to be some other piece to it that helps people with that comfortability.
I'd say I think it needs to be an active practice within an organization and an organization's culture. And so if you're just starting out, there are probably a number of steps that could be taken. We're lucky enough to have unifying principles that are spoken about by our senior leadership team and our CEO every time we have a conversation with him. He reminds us of the unifying principles of respect and unity, collaboration, nearly every time we have an all hands or some interaction with him. And it's just that constant reminder that we are expected to embody those principles in our work lives. And those reminders, I think, help keep us on the right track.
I was going to go to very, very similar place, but maybe from a startup perspective, we obviously do it different than CenturyLink. So after probably 6 years of just sort of like our values being just something that we always talked about, we finally got around to putting them down on paper, and we did it as a team-wide it was actually in a Google Doc, and it was a mess of a doc, as we were all tried to say what we had been living, and we got it down to honesty, purpose, grit, and quality, and then each of them had of course we're techie people, so they have 3 sub-bullets each, but one of them, and it actually happens to be in the honesty, was we have one that says to improve diversity and inclusion. Including socially diverse groups in the decision-making process makes us more creative and more diligent. Interacting with individuals who are different forces us to prepare better, to anticipate alternative viewpoints, and to expect that reaching consensus takes effort. And we put this in our job descriptions, and then we figured out not just that one, but each of the company values. As we've gotten down to the 3 sub-points of 4 different values, we started to ask specific questions in interviews to test for values. It used to be early on, we'd just be I would go in and be all right, is this person a culture fit? But it was this really not mature process, and it was and I think that we were infected by just bias of does this person look like me? Did they go to an Ivy League school? Did they, and it was that one's my pet peeve or whatever, but we would use these implicit biases, and then once we got it more granular, then we could not, it wasn't just do I sort of, can I relate to them? It was, let me ask this specific question that I'm pretty sure is a pretty good indicator of grit, and that's what we went for culture fit. So we figured out, not perfect, but how to better test for it in an interview setting.
So the 3 points that I'm hearing currently is put it in the job description, 1. 2, write it down, because it's important to make sure that you have something you can actually show somebody, because it matters that much. Yep. 3 is make sure that it's constantly brought up in meetings that we are trying to head that direction. And I think those are the 3 main
I have
points.
one to add to your point that's a practical point. I agree with, we have values and we do the same thing. But what we have found is our social, just the social gatherings that you do at work, we had to think really hard. Not everyone wants to go play paintball. Not everyone I'm like, paintball, oh no. When it's a male-dominated group, that's fun. I'm like, but not everyone wants to go golfing. Some people don't drink alcohol. Some people don't want to go to the happy hour. Some people have children at home, and a lunch is better than a happy hour. So thinking about those little mini messages you're sending by the way that people socialize can make a much more inclusive environment.
What happens when you see a co-worker or a colleague run afoul of your unifying principles? How do you intervene? Because I think overall awareness, I think, of your situation is the fundamental. That's the starting point for me. But when somebody, colors outside of the line, how do you respectfully, healthfully intervene?
That's a really good question. I'll just give you one answer. One of my most senior bosses was calling me Annie instead of Anne, which I took, I felt like that was diminishing. And I spent some time thinking about what's the right way to talk about this, and for me, I took him aside in the place where, we could have a frank conversation. I explained, why I was feeling that way. And, he listened to me and never did it again, but he was very shocked, and I think, finding the right forum, to have those conversations, but not being afraid to pull someone aside and correct them. But you don't do it in front of all of his peers or, in front of in a meeting at the moment, because I could have said something right when he did it, but I waited, thought about it, made sure that he understood, and that's, I think that's a difficult thing, but you have to do it.
I was just going to say it depends, like what the situation is and who the people are. And one more plug for our ally training. We actually go through probably 8 or 10 different situations and even role play them. So so everybody sort of gets a chance with those difficult conversations, and it's like all over the board. So it's there's no easy answer to that one. It's such a hard question.
But I don't think that we should be afraid to remind an employee of what those unifying principles are, and maybe re-educate them on how they can do a better job going forward. So we have constant reminders, as I said, with our leadership team, and it is echoed through.
As a peer, it may be more difficult. There are situations where one might observe a colleague overstepping. It's different if you are a manager when there's a hierarchy involved. But where I've observed a lot of breakdowns is when there's not that structure.
Yeah.
So I agree with what you're saying, and that to me runs back to awareness, right? But sometimes I've observed emerging artists or designers or something like that, they don't want to lose their job, so they'll swallow it. But I think that all that does is just keeps putting wood onto the fire.
Creating a tension and animosity and resentment. Yeah, that's something that is a cancer within an organization, and you really cannot allow that to fester. So I think it's a difficult topic, but I think if you do it appropriately and in a safe place, away from others, anytime I've ever had to do that, I've had an employee who's been receptive to it. They've understood and actually apologized.
And I'm going to just kind of try and bring it all back together here with one final question, which speaks to that point. Why is male allyship so important, and where is this issue headed in the future?
So I think it's only going to get stronger. I think as we educate men and our female counterparts as well, it's going to become more of a mainstream conversation within organizations and within our society in general. It's important because women bring so much to the table in any organization, and I believe that we need a way to cultivate them into leadership roles through allyship. Again, CenturyLink has been very supportive. I feel very fortunate in that regard, but as we expand out and look at other companies, I hope it will become just as strong there.
I think it's, especially now, we all realize that it's not done, like it's not even, it's not, and it's like, wow, hits you in the face a lot lately. So won't explain why, but you know what I'm talking about. But also, one thing that we talk about just to close is, we talk a lot about maternity leave, and I go on maternity leave and I'm looked at one way. Paternity leave at Accenture is still 2 weeks and women are getting 16. So when it becomes parent leave, then maybe it will be okay. Like how do we get past this? And I think that's something we're thinking about a lot. How do we make it so that we're all benefiting? Everyone is benefiting. I think that's when we move on.
We just at EnergySavvy, we just changed our parental leave to be parental leave, and then there's a primary caregiver and a non-primary caregiver, and those are the two sort of like categories. So to be as inclusive as possible. So here's what I like, my like 3 reasons why this is important, and I'm very like pragmatic, so I try and like shoot for, and I also talk to a lot of companies to try and convince them to work with Ada, right? So I say 3 things. One is in this economy, especially in tech, in this city, there is this fierce competition for talent. And our unemployment rate in Seattle just hit 3.5%, and I'm sure is way lower within tech, right? And every Bay Area software company is opening an engineering center up here now, if they haven't already, in recruiting. And so it's getting more and more and more competitive to hire great engineers. Just one data point to illustrate this. So the average starting salary for the first graduates of Ada, this was in 2014, was $75,000 was our starting salary. 12 months later, our second cohort, it was $86,000. 9 months later, third cohort was $96,000 average, and our last cohort that just graduated 6 months ago was $102,000 average. So that just happened over like 3 years, right? And that's an illustration. We've seen those same kinds of numbers at EnergySavvy from an engineering perspective. So for EnergySavvy, it's like a small employer. Like we can't afford to pay like the big guys can, right? And so we just realized like our only way of doing this and being successful in recruiting is like recruiting where the other guys aren't, right? And so that means a lot of different things, and we've used all kinds of like different weird strategies, but the biggest, like if you are looking, like the very, very first big slice is like if you're looking for software engineers and you're only hiring men, or you have an environment where you're only hiring men, you're ignoring 50% of the population, right? So there are lots of amazing software engineers in that sort of part of the population. And then if you are further ignoring anyone who doesn't look like you, sound like you, or grow up like you, then you're cutting off even more of it. So you're never going to be able to get. So I really like focus on the sort of like the war for talent, right? And you can't afford to not be inclusive. The last 2 I already mentioned, but the productivity of diverse teams is like, substantially higher. We've seen that again and again. And then the last thing is product quality. Like if your users are female and you have a whole bunch of, just dudes writing code, like the product is going to suck and it's not going to work. So, so those are 3 arguments. If you're talking to your VP of engineering or your CTO or your CEO or whatever, like just bust those out, and hopefully it speaks to them in a different way than just like, anything to do with social justice, which is also really true, but like there's like the numbers oriented approach, to use.
Business sense, good business sense.
All right, great. Thank you. Let's give it up for our panelists.